The marine biome is an environment consisting of salt water. The marine biome is in all the oceans and seas of the world and is the largest biome on Earth. A coral reef is a marine ecosystem that consists of reef-building corals. Coral reefs are mainly made out of calcium carbonate. Coral reefs occur in warm, shallow waters and include a wide variety of flora and fauna like algae, sea anemone, sea sponges, crustaceans, fish, etc. A coral reef is often quite colorful with the diverse species of coral. Coral reefs can appear as a fringing reef or a barrier reef. A fringing reef occurs closer to the coastline and is the most common type of reef. Barrier reefs are further away from the coastline and are usually separated by a deep lagoon. Coral reefs are scattered throughout the tropical and subtropical Western Atlantic and Indo-Pacific Oceans. These areas have the optimal conditions for coral reefs to grow, sufficient sunlight penetration, and the shallow warm waters. Reef development is generally more abundant in areas with more wave action, as this brings food, nutrients, etc. to the coral reef. Major coral reefs include the Great Barrier Reef, found on the east coast of Australia, the Apo Reef, found in the Philippines, and the Mesoamerican Reef, which is the largest coral reef in the Atlantic Ocean. Tourism is very common near coral reefs. The aesthetic features and beauty of marine life scattered around the reef naturally attracts many tourists. The tourism industry is even more prominent around major coral reefs like the Great Barrier Reef along the coast of Queensland, Australia. The tourism industry surrounding coral reefs involves activities such as snorkeling, scuba diving, and tours, etc., which are widely popular. These activities generally are very costly, meaning they contribute a significant amount to the Australian economy. It is estimated that the Great Barrier Reef contributes approximately $6.4 billion to the Australian economy each year, an impressive amount for a tourist attraction.
How does the industry interact and alter the biome? In total, coral reefs represent 36 billion USD a year in economic value to the world. Of that 36 billion, 19 billion represent the actual on-reef activities like diving, snorkeling, glass bottom boating, and wildlife watching on the reef itself. The other $16 billion comes from the reef-adjacent tourism, which includes enjoying beautiful views, beaches, seafood, and other activities that are afforded by the sheltering effect of adjacent reefs. Impact of the interactions. As most of the tourism in the coral reefs encompasses swimming with the coral reef and fish, many tourists accidentally touch or bump into parts of the reef. When they do accidentally touch, pollute, or break off parts of the reef, corals experience stress. The coral's organisms try to fight off the intrusion, but this leads to the process of coral bleaching. Coral bleaching is when the corals expel the brightly colored algae that live in them and become completely white. Once they bleach, the coral dies and can no longer contribute to the biodiversity of the reef community. The interaction of tourists can lead to the trampling or breaking of corals. Many of the tourists are likely to be inexperienced divers or snorkelers. Unfortunately, these are the people that cause the most damage. Another point associated with snorkelers in general is that there are some chemicals in their sunscreen that can kill coral reefs. Many tourists don't know of this, and they are actually killing the corals with their sunscreen. Marine life interactions, such as fish feeding or encounters with rare species, is another problem faced by the coral reef. These activities will only increase popularity and increase tourists. Fish feeding has been shown to result in a number of negative changes in the fish behavior. Some examples can include the time spent obtaining food, the size of the animal's home range, the reproductive activity, population density, and difference in migration patterns. How has the industry changed over time to improve the productivity of the biome? The Great Barrier Reef is the biggest coral reef in the world, situated off the coast of Queensland. There are numerous policies and laws designed to protect and preserve one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. The reef is protected by the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority. Some examples of policy applied in the reef include cruise ship management, permissions to operate in the reef, mooring on the reef, ship operations in the reef, control of invasive species, and numerous adaptations and preservation projects.
The Great Barrier Reef has thousands of policies. One of them is a Marine Tourism Contingency Plan. This policy states that the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority intends to make every reasonable effort to support the continuity of permitted tourist programs when an area within the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park is impacted by a severe environmental incident. This is both good and bad for the productivity of the industry and the environmental sustainability. This policy is good for tourism as it keeps a flow of revenue for the Great Barrier Reef. The money made from the consistent tourism can be put back into aiding the severe environmental incidents. Even though the money is used for a good thing, this also hurts the environment. No one knows what tourists will do. Some of them do more damage than the Great Barrier Reef, more than they pay to see it. By having this policy, the Great Barrier Reef are putting the tourist first rather than the conservation of the environment. The Great Barrier Reef Marine Act 1975 is one of the national policies established for the Great Barrier Reef. The policy was established because the government was concerned of people drilling for oil near or in the Great Barrier Reef. The policy established for the Great Barrier Reef to be protected and managed well. It also states that mining and petroleum exploration and extraction are banned, but other activities such as fishing are permitted in specific areas. This policy both hurts and protects Australia. This policy hurts the economy as there's lots of oil beneath the Great Barrier Reef. With all these resources, Australia would make lots of money from drilling at these sites. On the other hand, drilling for oil in the Great Barrier Reef would hurt it heavily. While drilling, if oil spills, all types of fish will be affected and coral will die. This would make the Great Barrier Reef less of an attraction as it would just be a polluted drill site. Instead of doing that, the Act protects the Great Barrier Reef and makes it more money off tourism than they would have with the oil sold. The Great Barrier Reef is suffering from many tourists who excavate exiled coral from the reef. This is causing a lot of damage to the food web and the ecosystem and disrupting the flora and fauna there. To prevent this, we have thought of a policy where a mandatory security check must be conducted for visitors who are doing activities such as snorkeling and scuba diving. If they are partaking in these activities, they will be fined. This policy will significantly decrease the amount of coral destroyed using artificial means.